Welcome to the Practice Podcast, a show created by lawyers to help lawyers in life and business without all the complicated lawyer language. Let's welcome Bast Amron founders and your hosts, Jeff Bast and Brett Amron.
Hello, this is Jeff Bast.
This is Brett Amron. We're here for the Practice Podcast.
And today we have a very special guest, Lissette Carreras.
Very special.
An almost 8 year attorney here at Bast Amron. Hello, Lissette.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Lissette, how are you?
So nice to be on here.
Why don't you introduce yourself? We're happy to have you, by the way. Introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell us just a little bit about your background, who you are, where you came from.
Loaded question. So, Lissette Carreras, I am a native of Miami. I am first generation Cuban American. Went to local schools, graduated from FIU with a minor in Spanish and a major in sociology, and didn't quite know what to do with that. And so I ended up in law school. Great decision that was. And
We're happy about that decision. Yes.
It's turned out all right. But it was, I didn't know what to do with sociology. It was great to study. It was a lot of fun. And then I was sort of stuck with this degree. So anyway, law school was great. I went to the George Washington University Law School.
By the way, did they teach that on day one? Like you have to put a "the" in front of it, or that's something you learn over 3 years?
No, it's the George Washington University Law School. And so you can imagine all the law students think that's hilarious to like force the article before the, the name of the school. And so, yeah, it's kind of a running joke. So I did that, obviously 3 years. And then I came back home on a mission to serve my community as a prosecutor.
Where were you a prosecutor?
Here in Miami-Dade.
Miami-Dade County prosecutor, huh?
Yes.
They can grow really, really good lawyers there, can't they?
In fact, they do. I count myself among them.
Yes, you are.
And you know what?
What?
I count you among them as well.
Look at that. Boy, that was a softball. Good one. You hit it out of the park.
I had to. That was easy.
Tell us, how long were you a prosecutor?
I was a prosecutor for just over 5 years.
And just tell us, for those that don't know, where do you start and where did you end up in your 5-year career?
You start at the state attorney's office with an intensive training, right? You train for about between a month or two. And then you are asked to decide whether you want to prosecute DUIs or whether you want to prosecute domestic violence misdemeanor cases.
Wow, those are two wonderful options, huh?
Well, right. And my bleeding heart opted for the domestic violence misdemeanor cases.
For those that can't see, obviously, I am wincing at that decision. I did not make that choice.
Brett, you went with DUI?
I went with DUIs, yes.
Most people go with DUIs. In fact, it's really the majority of the class goes to DUIs. It was probably about a dozen of us. It was a dozen out of 60 attorneys that started in my class. Yeah. We went to the DUI misdemeanor unit.
Let me ask you.
You went to domestic violence, right?
To the domestic violence misdemeanor unit.
And I'm joking, and it's sort of, but it really is serving the community to do that work.
Domestic violence.
Because obviously it is so important. There's great victims. And I'm joking only because we were sort of looking at each other and like, it is tough work. And we're going to get into the reason why in a bit. And what's made you such a phenomenal lawyer is part of the reason why we were sort of looking at each other like, man, that was not the best choice, perhaps.
Well,
but
yes
it is great to serve the community. It really was great.
For sure, it was probably the most difficult assignment in my entire tenure as a prosecutor. So if you can imagine in 5 years, I ended up prosecuting homicides, a lot of violent crimes, a lot of armed crimes like armed trafficking, armed kidnapping, sexual batteries. And of my entire tenure in the state attorney's office, I would say my assignment in the domestic violence misdemeanor unit was the most difficult, the most challenging, because the cases are simple cases. A lot of the victims are real victims, people that are victimized over and over again, and people that this is the first time that they get the courage to call the police and to file charges, except that 2 months ago when they had a broken arm based on a domestic violence incident, they didn't call the police for the broken arm, right? Where you had a real injury, a real visible injury, a provable injury. This time, they called the police because they were pushed. And so it's difficult from an evidentiary perspective, right, to prove a push.
Yep.
Right.
Or
And-
a yell, like he yelled at me or she yelled at me.
Or spit at me.
Or spit, right,
Or
exactly.
slapped me.
Threatened,
Exactly.
right.
Or scratched me.
Right.
Or grabbed my arm and pulled me.
Yep.
All of those things are batteries under the law, right? They're simple batteries. An unwanted touch is a simple battery. But in these domestic violence situations where you have people that, by the very nature of domestic violence, they have a relationship, it's a difficult thing to prove. And to add another layer to that, these are things that happen mostly in private. And so you don't have independent witnesses of these actions. You may have a child, you may have a family member who's going to be biased in favor of one of the parties. And so as far as proof is concerned, right, which is what we were concerned with as lawyers, we had to prove a case. And as a prosecutor, you have a very high burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so in those situations where you have a real victim many times who's aggrieved, who's finally had the courage to come forward, you have no proof.
Right.
And so a lot of times it's a he said, she said. But these cases are tough. And a lot of these offenders are first-time offenders. And a lot of them are serial offenders. I mean, you see, and when you pull up their priors, you see all of the cases that they have marked where they're domestic violence cases, and they have multiple cases against the same victim. And so it's gut-wrenching. It was very difficult.
And how often, and this is where the added difficulty comes in from a prosecution perspective, but how often would you have, obviously the victim, as you said, gets up the courage to finally say something or say something again, right? To the police, they call the police. So that's the time when they call the police and they make the report to the police. Then there is a delay.
Oh, yeah.
Right? A long delay until you get the case. And then it's your time to reach out to the victim. And either by then, the first time you reach out to them, they say what? Sometimes, right?
Yeah. So it's you can imagine they call for help, right? When the situation is still sort of hot. And so you have 3 weeks, oftentimes longer, to file a case. And in that interim, as a prosecutor, you have to investigate the case. And so sometimes, right, the complaining victim is still upset, is sticking to their guns. And so you have them come in and you get their statement, you take a sworn statement, and then you file a case. By the time the case goes to trial, I mean, you're looking at several months. And oftentimes these are people that have children in common or share a home or, have business or, it's familial relationships that you've been together for many years. And so most of the time by then, the victim isn't as committed to prosecuting the case.
Yep.
And so I found oftentimes that when you develop a positive relationship with the victim, you offer the victim services, you support the victim, that the victim is more likely to participate in the prosecution, regardless of the length of time that it takes to go to trial.
So would you say that then being a prosecutor allows you to step outside of the picture frame, right? And be able to look at the picture and understand that there are forces outside of just being a prosecutor and saying, this is the case and I need to get this case to trial, I need to prove this case. There are other issues they need to deal with.
Sometimes the issue of proof is the simplest of the issues because the outside factors are so strong.
Yeah.
And so, absolutely.
Right. And I know we're going to get to this in a minute, and sort of the transition and what you've taken, but I would say that would be a skill that you would use today, right? Understanding that there is a bigger picture here and understanding either a particular witness or our client or perhaps the adverse party in terms of just sort of looking at the big picture and understanding where everything fits in.
Absolutely. The underlying dynamics, right? The dynamics that are at play, apart from just the legal issues, that's really where I think my strength is. And I think a lot of times that's really, how cases get resolved, how cases get pushed. And looking at it in the context of a trial, that underlying dynamic or understanding that dynamic really gives the litigants the upper hand or the lawyers the upper hand in presenting the evidence and cross-examining and looking for those Achilles heels in the case and in the witnesses themselves. And so absolutely. And I think thinking back to that time as a domestic violence misdemeanor prosecutor, I think that's really where I started honing in on that skill, on developing those relationships with my victims, with the officers, whose obviously collaboration I would need sometimes to bring even the victims in to testify, you know? And so that translates now to building the relationship with the client, understanding the facts of the case early on. Because once you have an understanding of the facts of the case, it puts you in a better position to litigate. You know what you need in discovery. You know what the case issues are going to be. And you also understand your client's goals, right? In any litigation, right. And which is really what drives us, is accomplishing those goals for the clients. And that could look very different depending on the case and depending on the client.
Well, and sometimes it's helping the client understand their own goals because they may or may not understand. You know, they know they want to win this case, but where does the case fit into their bigger picture, their business or whatever, you know, their life?
Right. That's right. And then that's a conversation that I had back then and that I have now. It's like, I hear you saying this. Is this what you want? I mean, this is what that looks like, right? Like you have victims say, you know, I just want him to get help.
Right.
Okay, well, this is what help looks like. Right. Help looks like you showing up to trial, right? Yeah. And prosecuting this case so that we can create leverage for a plea deal, right? And so that's what that looked like then. And that's sort of the conversations that we have now, obviously dealing with many different issues. I mean, that looks very different when you're dealing with complex civil matters.
Yeah. So stepping back a minute, when you went, Lissette, to the prosecutor's office, did you have a sense, okay, I want to be a prosecutor. I'm interested in criminal defense or criminal work?
I loved criminal work. I thought it fit my sociology degree well. I was like a law and order junkie. Like I lived for it.
Right.
And I was like, this is what I want to do. And it, I wanted to serve the community. And as a prosecutor, you have the most power to affect the most change, not just for victims of crime, but also for defendants, like people that are wrongly accused or where there's insufficient evidence to sustain charges against them. As a prosecutor, you have the power to dismiss cases, to not file cases, correct. And so
I would add one more thing to that before sorry to interrupt you, which is you can affect change on the defendants in one more way, which is perhaps to change the direction of their life by helping them. They have to be willing, and obviously the family too, but there's an ability for a prosecutor to do that too.
Correct, right. And as a defense attorney, as a criminal defense attorney, you can advocate for it, but you don't have the power to accomplish it if the prosecutor's not willing. And so as a prosecutor, you're uniquely positioned. And that was, to me, was really awe-inspiring and humbling to be in that position. And criminal defense just really didn't interest me, right? I wanted to be on the side of right. I wanted to wear the white hat. And so that was really important to me. And so I stayed at the state attorney's office. You have a 3-year commitment. I stayed through my 3-year commitment. Then I was offered the ability to jump into a specialized unit. So I prosecuted career criminals. Right. Charged with first degree and life felonies. I was assigned to the repeat offender courts, which is a specialized courtroom for violent career criminals charged, with first degree and life felonies. So it was very trial active. We had fantastic judges. And I ended up staying on for almost 2 years, 2 additional years past my commitment. And it was great. I mean, it was really great. It was a great time. It was great cases. It was, we were putting away. We were prosecuting really bad guys, like that had done really bad things again and again. And I say guys because actually most of them, the majority were males, but it was very trial active. You had the best of the best on the public defender side. And public defenders, they are highly qualified, like the prosecutors, right? We're thrown into the courtroom on day one.
Yep.
And we keep going back into the courtroom day after day after day. A lot of motion practice, a lot of trial practice. And so you really have the opportunity to hone your skills.
Right.
So over 5 years as a prosecutor, do you have a sense of how many cases you prosecuted and how many you tried?
I would.
Would you take a guess?
So really, how many trials did you do? Like we don't. Honestly, you can't say how many cases you
Because you
prosecuted.
handle so many cases.
Because thousands.
Yeah,
but
I touched thousands of cases.
you touch
Thousands.
thousands of
Over
cases.
5
Yeah.
years.
So
how many cases would
So
actually
I
go
had
to
about,
trial?
I think I had about 60 jury trials.
yeah. And how many bench do you think?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
dozens of bench
Yeah.
trials. Yeah.
And, as far as like motion practice, I mean, motions to, dispositive motions to suppress.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
And then there
So that's
evidentiary
60 over
hearings
5 years.
and evidentiary hearings on probation violations. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
you would have those all the time to add to that too.
this
So,
was stuff that happened almost on a daily basis.
Yep.
You had evidentiary hearings on a daily basis.
Yep.
You had trial calendar probably once a week.
and you get to really hone your skills carrying boxes of files on the cart. Right. Your cart
Yes.
skills.
Well, in the
From county
beginning,
court. Yeah.
when you start in county court and you have multiple boxes
Yep.
where you pull with the cart, sometimes multiple carts.
Outside from the county court building
Yeah.
to the courthouse.
Right.
Yes.
That's what the DUI people did. Yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, towards the end of my career, I had a few big folders I carried around because they were obviously much more serious cases, much more involved.
So when those specialized prosecutors would walk in the courtroom, when you're a pit prosecutor, right? You remember this from your days as a pit prosecutor. You're just in there with calendar or whatever, and then you get a particular case that's on calendar, and then you get the specialized prosecutor with 2 files in your hand, and everyone's like,
Yeah.
wow.
Right.
What-
And
what's a pit prosecutor?
Somebody who it's assigned to a division, and any case that gets filed in that division is either there's an A, a B, and a C, and that's the level. So A is like first degree and life felonies, B is second degree, and C is third degree felonies. And you move up the chain, whatever, and that's being a pit prosecutor. Anything that comes in to that division gets assigned to one of those 3, and then there's a division chief.
So those 3 are pit
Yeah,
prosecutors?
those are
Correct.
pit prosecutors. You're in the pit. You're in that courtroom all the time. Then you get a specialized prosecutor, like Lissette was in her last 2 years, and they come into the courtroom for a specific case that may be assigned to that judge. And they come in with their 2 files, and they look all like everyone's like, "Oh my God!" There's
usually the specialized units
Yep.
have like different color
Oh, yeah.
files.
It's
So
very
you come in with your
important. very.
You come in with your color coded files, and everybody's
Yeah.
like, she's
Yeah.
here. They're
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
And the pit prosecutors kind of look like, Anyway,
I never felt that. And
by the
actually,
way,
No.
for anyone listening, the energy in this room is you could cut it with a knife. It's,
no, it's awesome.
It is.
These two former prosecutors, they could talk shop about this for days.
For
You know
days,
what?
I know we could bore people for days.
it's
yeah.
exciting. It was,
Yeah.
you know what? It's an exciting start to your career. It's exciting to practice really in the pit. I mean, you are in court every single day. You're dealing with families and victims and cops and defendants, and it's a very
real legal
dynamic.
work out of law school.
It is.
Immediate.
You're
Yeah.
doing actual
Yeah.
lawyer
It
work.
is-
You're being a lawyer from day one.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
is like, I think it's really the purest practice of law in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. And it's a great training ground, both for prosecutors and for defense attorneys.
And
Well,
by
and
the
also,
way,
and really why we're here is you're now in a civil practice. So,
Right.
and that's really what we wanted to talk about was, is that good training to be a civil lawyer? Because most people think of the prosecutor's office as, if you don't want to do criminal law, it's not on their radar. But arguably, I'm looking at 2 excellent civil litigators, commercial litigators, who both have the prosecutorial background.
I think it's an excellent training ground. And a lot of people may have different thoughts on it, but there's no training like the training that you get when you are the boots on the ground as a prosecutor or even as a public defender. The level of, I don't even know where to start, right? Like, so you develop a set of skills for investigating cases, like fact-intensive cases. You deal with witnesses on a daily basis. And as you are interviewing them, you are automatically just assessing credibility, assessing reliability. You're thinking, what's the judge going to think about this witness? How's the jury going to react? And so it's a whole set of skills that you learn on the go, but it really hones your skills as a litigator. And so you bring those to criminal practice. And so as a prosecutor, you know what it's going to take to present a case to a jury. You know what it's like to stand in front of a jury. You know how your witness is going to present, what facts you're going to lead with. And so in the civil practice, it's the same thing, except most civil litigators don't have the trial experience that you gain as a prosecutor.
so for me, right, similar to what you just said. It was like what we learned was sort of the framework. It's like when you're building a house, right? It's just the frame of the house is what we had, which is the ability to walk into any court anywhere and be comfortable, the ability to question witnesses, the ability to assess credibility, the ability to investigate cases and sort of pull out facts, try cases. That, to me, was the sort of the framework. And then the substantive law that you practice is what you fill in from there. And so that translates into now what you're doing, right? Because you had that. You had that grit almost, right? From being a prosecutor is like, man, I've been to battle. I've been there. So whatever you throw at me, no big deal.
Oh, it's no big deal.
Right.
It's no big deal.
It's also a comfort level.
100%.
Your comfort level in taking a deposition or putting a witness on the stand or appearing in the court.
No concern, right? You've done that. And a lot of times, trial, now we get months and sometimes years to prepare, and we get to take discovery and what. How many times did we try cases with an arrest affidavit?
Oh my God, too many times.
Interviewing witnesses outside the courtroom right before trial and picking a jury.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yep.
You get a call like the judge says, there's trial starting now. Pick which case you want to take to trial. And you've got 5, 6, 7 cases that are ready, and you grab your file, you make sure your witnesses are there, you get everyone lined up and you go. I mean, It was crazy, but it was a lot of fun too.
It was great training ground. I mean, it really was, right? I mean, it was and especially for what you're doing now. So pulling into what you do now, right? And we've kind of hit on some of this, right? You have the ability to handle whatever's kind of thrown at you in court, outside of court as well. Yeah. And, building cases and investigating them in terms of the civil side, no matter what kind of claim it is. And again, it could be on the plaintiff side or the defense side. It doesn't really matter. Although I tend to think that sort of our skill set is probably would lend itself more on the plaintiff side. But we've done defense work and it kind of pulls as well on the defense side.
Absolutely. And a lot of times when we do defense work, we still treat it as if we're prosecuting the case. I mean, most of the time we tend to be more on the...
Which is a good thing though, right? If you're on the defense side, it's a good thing to think about it from the perspective of, well, if I was prosecuting or this case as a plaintiff, how would I be doing it and what would I be doing?
The best defense lawyers understand what a prosecutor is going to be focused on.
Of course.
Right.
You have to anticipate the case and you have to prepare for it.
Right.
And so, now we get a case and you run through what the applicable law is, like what would I have to prove, right? If I had to present this to a judge or a jury, and you have that framework, and then it's like you plug in the facts. It's like, okay, what facts do I need to develop more? What facts are favorable? Which facts are not favorable? How can we work with those, right? In order to get the result that we need. And so, absolutely. And you have that. I mean, you have that at the state attorney. You have that when you're prosecuting criminal cases. And certainly we have that now in dealing with the complex civil cases that we deal with.
And let's not lose again, you mentioned this in the beginning, the human component of litigation. Because litigation involves people. There's going to be people that are sitting on the witness stand. There are going to be people who are making decisions about whether to settle or whether to prosecute, how far to go, what they want, and understanding and being able to connect to people, communicate with them, empathize with them, anticipate their needs is critical to what we do.
It is critical. It is critical. And oftentimes, and I saw it in the criminal practice and I see it now as well, sometimes the person is just aggrieved and they want to be heard. And they want the opportunity to be heard and they want a stage and they, and sometimes just having that conversation and validating the client or validating the victim is worth it. And sometimes, I had conversations with the victim say, listen, I don't think we can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you sure you still want to take the stand and testify? And they say, yeah, I want to sit there and I want to tell my side of the story. And so we see that now in the civil practice as well. We have clients that have been harmed or aggrieved and they want their day.
They want to be heard.
They want to be heard. Yeah. Right.
And there's a value to that. And so that's part of also understanding, what motivates the client, what's the client's goal, right?
Right. And by the way, it doesn't mean if they want to be heard, it's okay, well, how can we make that happen so that maybe we don't Maybe we don't go to trial. Maybe we do it in a mediation format where you want to be heard. Great, you can be heard. And then we can try and resolve this case. Or in deposition, or, you go to trial, whatever it is. But it's, as Jeff pointed out and you pointed out, which is it's the empathy side. It's understanding that there's perhaps forces other than what appears on the paper.
There are always forces other than what appear on the paper.
True. That is true.
And I think if you're a good attorney, the sooner you identify those forces, I think the better position, you're in a much better position to represent your client and to resolve the matter in a way that's favorable to your client.
Yeah, it's understanding the why.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this?
Right.
What's the objective? What do you really want? And again, oftentimes the client doesn't really appreciate the why. They need our help to get there.
Yeah.
So would you recommend being a prosecutor to any law students that's graduating from law school? Is that something you'd recommend?
I would.
Whether they know if they, even if they're leaning civil, or what do you think? What do you guys think?
I would say, so I made my way to the state attorney's office. While you're thinking, I will jump in for a second.
Thanks, Brett.
I made my way to the state attorney's office. I was interning. I was a law clerk for a very prominent criminal defense lawyer who also did civil as well. I had an incredible experience with him. Thank you, Joel Hirschhorn and Brian Bieber. But I asked them, if I want courtroom and trial experience, where should I go? And they said state attorney's office. So if anybody's out there who thinks that that's what they want, I think it is a good place to go. And they may fall in love. And in other words, if you're not dead set on, like you, I want to go back and have an impact on my community, and this is what I want to do. There are lifetime prosecutors, and kudos to them, and that's phenomenal work, and it's great. But if there's lawyers who may not know and may not think that's what I want to do as a prosecutor, if they think maybe I want to hone my skills as a trial lawyer and that's what I want to do, there's really no better place to get thrown in the middle and just say, get thrown in the pool basically and say sink or swim. And that's it.
That's 100% true. If the goal is to do trial work and you want to understand it and live it and get, evidence, the rules of evidence, they were like second nature.
Yep.
You were constantly dealing with these. I find like civil lawyers generally don't have a good handle on the rules of evidence.
Right. Well, they just don't deal with it as often.
Right. And so when you're in the courtroom on a daily basis, it's second nature. So if that's what you want, then absolutely that's where you need to start.
And you spent 5 years there. Did you feel at any point during that 5-year period that you were falling behind your peers who were working in law firms and advancing?
Financially, yes.
That is a driver for a lot of, unfortunately, that's a driver for a lot of law students coming out.
Yep.
They have to take the job with the highest pay.
It's a huge consideration. I went to the George Washington University Law School, which is a very expensive law school. And so, I had some scholarship money, but I also had a lot of loans. And so making those payments was excruciating in those first years. And so in that sense, I felt very much behind my peers who started out at big firms, right? But my peers that started out at big firms were writing memos for the associates who were then turned around to the partner. And so they never, they weren't even drafting pleadings for the first couple of years. And so me, on the other hand, right, I was in the courtroom every day. I was in front of juries. I was trying cases. I was handling DNA evidence and weapons and drug evidence. And, it was very exciting.
Doing real work.
It was
exciting stuff.
It was very exciting. Right. And so I had the stories and they paid for the dinners.
Yeah.
And so that's how it went. So yes and no.
But at the end of 5 years, you had this unbelievable experience that you could then take and apply in a civil context that they just did not have. So
absolutely. And that they'll never have. There's no way to get that level of that depth of experience.
You can't recreate that anywhere. Right. Really can't. It's invaluable experience.
Yeah. No, and I'm happy to have both of you as my colleagues at here at Bast Amron, because I think there are not many better litigators than the two of you, anywhere. So.
Oh, it's so nice of you, Jeffrey.
So happy to have you. So the lesson is become a prosecutor. If you want to try cases and you're thinking about,
if you're thinking about trial and you want the courtroom experience, I would say being a prosecutor is a great way to get that experience.
I agree.
Yeah. It's the long play, right? It is understanding that your career is a marathon.
Right.
And so as Lissette just alluded to, I had friends too that went in and made a lot more money, obviously, than I did at the beginning. But it's a long play and you have to think about that. Like, okay, I'm going to give it up and get the experience, and maybe I stay and I love it and I'll stay forever. Or maybe I stay for X number of years and then I go out and I take my skills and use them elsewhere. But really incredible experience, unmatched, I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Is 5 years the right amount of time?
I think 5 years is probably too long. I think most people would say it's too long. For me, I was, by 3 years, I was ready to be done. But then the assignment into the repeat offender courts just gave me a second wind, And when you're practicing in front of judges that are, like the judges that I had were fantastic.
Yeah.
When I had meaningful cases with real victims of serious crimes. I mean, it was a very meaningful experience and it was very trial active. And I couldn't walk away. So I stayed the extra 2. But usually by 3 years, especially if you're a pit prosecutor, you're tired and you're ready for a good paycheck.
And how'd you find the transition to civil practice? Was it a challenge?
It was a challenge. It was very much a challenge.
Yep.
The learning curve was steep and it was not easy. Everything was brand new, right? I mean, I went to law school out of state. And so, obviously I had to brush up on, the civil rules, the civil law. I mean, everything was brand new. And then add to that billable hours. Like when you're at the state attorney's office or the public defender's office, you don't have to account for your time.
Yeah.
Right. Another benefit. There you go. There's another benefit to being a prosecutor.
Right. The accountability was different. The accountability was showing your face to the judge, right? And you have to be ready. But when you transition to civil practice, certainly the billable hour regime was a challenge in the beginning.
But like anything, it's a transition and you're so well trained that it's worth it.
It's not as bad as you would think. You get used to it like anything else. And you learn to document your time and think through things in a different way than you did at the state attorney's office, and you become more productive as well.
Before I forget, the one other thing that as a prosecutor you have to have, right, in being in court every single day is you have to know your cases.
Oh, yeah.
You have to be prepared. And that also helps you, right? When you go into court on a motion for an extension of time, because you've been trained that way, that anything can happen and a judge may ask you questions about the case itself. So you have to be prepared at all times.
Yeah.
Right?
At all times.
Yeah.
Anything can happen when you're in court.
Which is very important in the civil context, right?
Yeah,
Because we know we've been in court and there's lawyers who are not prepared because they're like, I'm here on a motion for extension of time. Judge, I am not prepared to answer that question.
Right.
But we have been trained as prosecutors to know better, right?
We know better and we do better.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Lissette, any parting words to lawyers considering the practice as a prosecutor?
Just do it. Just
Nice.
do it. If you have questions, email me. I'm happy to talk to anyone. It was really the best of times and the worst of times in some ways, but it was really the best of times. And that energy that you mentioned that was going in the room is because it really was that exciting. It was really that exciting.
I mean, you start with a class.
Yeah.
So everyone is usually about the same age. I mean, you have some people who are second career lawyers who went back a little older, but so you're all young and you're all running around trying cases and pulling people into trials and sitting with your friends trying cases.
I mean, you're having a meaningful impact on people's lives immediately.
But you don't even, I mean, yes, you are. But I think at the time, at least for me, I didn't even focus on, like, I'm in trial and you're trying to put somebody away for life. It didn't even, we were so young and moving around and flying around, like it didn't even dawn on me at that time, looking back on it now, obviously. But I'm in trial, like, all right, let's go. And like sitting with a buddy of mine and we're just trying the case. And, like we were young, just not having fun, because I don't want to say it was fun, but just had the energy and like didn't even focus on the fact that we're trying to put somebody away for life.
You know what? For me, it was a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
I really was it was, like I said, it was so humbling. Like I remember the names of, I have, some young people that I put away for a really long time. Not super young, but, youngish.
Yeah.
People that I also, you offer a good deal to and they don't take it and then they're convicted.
Yeah.
And then you have minimum mandatories, right? You have like mandatory life sentences. And so I have a lot of people, I mean, not a lot, but I have people I think about actually And I think about what a waste it was. But I did my job. You offer a good deal. If they don't take it, it's really their decision. If they get convicted, then there's nothing you can do, right? The law sort of ties your hands, but it weighs on me. I think about those people.
Well, that's because you're a very good person.
I try.
Yeah.
I try.
Well, you're both good people.
But that's what makes you an even better lawyer, is that you're a good person and you think about these things. So
right.
I do. But yeah, it didn't make it any less exciting to be, in trial with your best friends and trial's exciting. Trial's fun. I think that's what a lot of lawyers want to do, trial work.
Yeah. It's the hardest work and the best work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hardest and most rewarding.
Hardest and most rewarding.
Like most things in life.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, thanks. This has
been time to end, right?
This has been a great conversation, Lissette. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me.
I've enjoyed it. Nelson,
you're the man. Thanks, sir.
For more information on this show and other resources, visit bastamron.com and connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram @Bast Amron.